So once again, welcome to this afternoon's webinar. This is Getting and Keeping the First Job. And I am Matthew Zelmer, the Parent and Youth Services Coordinator with Wisconsin Facets, and we welcome all of you and thank you for taking the time out of your day, perhaps out of your lunch hour, to spend some time with us today and get some timely and valuable information, whether you are someone who is looking for a job or more likely for our typical audience trying to support someone who is looking for a job, will be soon, or would perhaps like to transition to something else and need some tools. So this is a curriculum, a presentation that was created by our Parent Center friends in Minnesota, the PACER Center. There's a Parent Center, at least one for each state and territory in the US. We are it for Wisconsin. Minnesota, our PACER is it for Minnesota, and we thank them for allowing us to adapt this curriculum and bring to you all of its content, as well as some Wisconsin specific touches, perhaps, as we go along. So the first thing we're going to do, and as always, my mouse likes to freeze, or my keyboard freezes at the beginning of the presentation. You see a little bit of an agenda slide that I'll go over in a second. But first, I'm going to launch a quick poll, just because for our purposes, we would like to know who is with us today on the live call. So this one simply asks you guys to pick from one of the two options. We're okay. We're over half of you have voted now. I'm going to leave it open a few more seconds. Okay, we've been on 82 for a while, so we might have some participants who are away from their screens. So I'm going to close that, move on with the content. But what we've got is a 2-to-1 spread. Most of you are professionals rather than parents, but this information is applicable to these two groups and to youth alike. So we don't have any live youth, which stands to reason because they should be in class right now or on their lunch break. But certainly feel free, those of you who are parents, teachers, and in any other professional capacity, feel free to pass on any of this information and resources from today to your children or students as applicable. Before we get going, I need to turn off my webcam because no matter where I move it, it's blocking my screen. Or we'll just continue because it does not want to. There we go. Oh, we've got a comment coming in. Oh, we've got someone participating saying he has a group of students with him. That is fantastic. So I'm going to get into our agenda slide right now, and then we'll dive into content. Thank you for sharing that. So these are just some things we're going to touch on today. These are general headings that we won't cover any of these in a whole lot of detail. Self-awareness and the role of families is probably things that will permeate throughout, given that we are a parent center also serving youth. We do have some supplementary handouts, 2 of them. We'll briefly address building a resume, but we have some sample resumes that stakeholders have given us permission to share. I believe they are all former students' resumes now, but they are resumes of real people with disabilities. So good examples for you to download, and you see in the chat box there, if anyone had trouble doing that, email me and I will send the materials to you following today's call. We'll also touch a little bit on how agencies can help, and big pieces of these are the discussion of disability disclosure and job accommodations, how those relate, and how those two things relate to a job interview circumstance. So we will get into all of those things as we go along. The disclaimer is this is not a roadmap for how to achieve a particular career path, but it's mostly an introduction to things like building soft skills, questions and answers we need to ask ourselves or the kids that we're supporting as they begin their employment journeys. And it is tough out there. We kind of say that in perpetuity, but obviously with a pandemic and school being what it has been in the last year plus, some of these transition supports that are integral to an employment search process or the building of employment related skills are kind of behind, and we'll touch on that as well. So this is not meant to be a specific roadmap to a particular job or career path, but things that we think can apply across the board of possible chosen fields, types of employment, and certainly disability types. So keep those things in mind as we go. And another screen freeze. So there we go. So it all begins with self-awareness. And as my day job here at Wisconsin Facets, most of the year is to discuss with parents of youth with disabilities, mainly the IEP related issues or concerns or questions that they are having. But in the summers, a major thing that I do is direct youth self-advocacy and leadership training through various programs. And in part, it gives kids something to do when school is out. But a major thing that we are introducing them to and helping them to practice is disability awareness. And it is pretty much an annual occurrence that somebody new comes in to one of our programs, one of our events, and they, at some point, we end up finding out, or they are forced to say that they do not know what their disability is, much less how it impacts their learning and living. Most of the time, I think participants are aware that we are an organization that helps people with disabilities, and our partner organizations do the same. So that's why they're at the event. But it's very important as youth get to know, as particularly as they get older, and there's no age that's really too early to begin practicing some of these skills or giving them some of this knowledge. But you must know what your disability is, and eventually practice telling others about it, disclosing your disability if you're going to, get your needs met, should you need some supports or accommodations to succeed on the job. And, given that the title of this webinar is Getting and Keeping Your First Job, we are going to talk primarily in the context of employment here this afternoon. I'm gonna we've got one question coming in that I'm going to hold for a few more slides, but thank you for chiming in early, because I think this person asks a most important question. And there is still some screen freeze going on, so I apologize for that, folks. Here you see not an exhaustive list, as I don't think any of these bulleted lists that you'll see today are meant to be exhaustive. But the first question that this asks is, what is your dream job? So we got to start somewhere with our students with disabilities. So what is your dream job, which is a more sophisticated, perhaps, version of the age-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you see a variety of, oh, I made a mistake with the webcam screen share is not on. So it should be there now. Thanks to this person for chiming in. So I'll back up a little bit. These are some questions that we would encourage you to ask with your children, with students that you're working with, beginning with what is your dream job, and it being the sort of more sophisticated version of what do you want to be when you grow up. So the first thing underneath that, it's easy to probably come up with a dream job when you're young, just something you see in your neighborhood or around your home. Maybe you want to be what your mom or dad is because you think it's cool and it's all you know. But we do need to know what skills do we need, what classes do we need to take to have that job. And down underneath the last two bullet points um, have more to do with an overall theme of disability awareness, but these are important questions to ask based on personal preferences or health needs, stronger times of day, and so on. So we'll dive into that a little bit later on. I do want to go ahead and launch another poll. This would be something that I just decided to do today. This is our second and final poll, but a little question for you guys about dream jobs. And we have three potential answers. So let's see if folks are in their dream job. We've got about a third of you have voted so far. Okay, now we're up to 80%. I'll keep it open just for a few more seconds uh, in case someone comes back to their screen here. All right, we haven't had any movement for a while, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. We had 17% of you say you didn't know yet, and the rest was even between yes and no. And just my way of thinking was I might have expected fewer participants to respond that they are in their dream job or have been. And I commend those who can say that. I will share with the audience full disclosure that though I am an individual with a disability, I did not envision myself coming up through school working in this field. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. Was and is in some ways still my dream job. That's what my majority of my academic background comes in. I've been able to engage in some of those activities since college on the side, but this is what I'm doing now, and there isn't anything wrong with that. I use this to illustrate the point that many of us won't have that dream job or that thing we thought we wanted to do growing up, or won't stay in it for a variety of reasons. So if our kids struggle, if our students struggle to come up with what their dream job is, or struggle finding out or developing skills to obtain that dream job, that's okay. But much of what we do today is going to be about how do we support them in the quest to find and keep community-based employment. I see we've got a raised hand that may be an accidental mouse click. If that person has a question, go ahead and type that into the question box, and I'll get to that a few slides from now. So any good employment search process is not you go to bed at night thinking I'm going to start tomorrow and you know exactly what you are going to do when you start and everything is taken care of. So we plan to help avoid poor job matches. For example, I'm a pretty big example guy when I do this presentation. Um, I, as an individual with a physical disability, I'm not going to apply for a job that is driving a forklift because I don't drive due to my disability. And while some people with physical disabilities can and do drive, most of the time, if not exclusively, driving a forklift would be an example of a poor job match. And that's going back to the previous slide. That's why you see the question. If you've got medical needs that make you a morning person or a night person or just something that you feel you really don't want to work an early morning job, you know, in the industry that I studied as a student, you would not want to apply for jobs that are working on the morning shows then, or any other job that the bulk of the work is done during the day. If you're a night owl, perhaps don't apply for those jobs. You know, what are you good at? What educational training, what classes have you had? These are all things that uh, asking these questions and knowing where to find the answers, interviewing people in the field, things of that nature can help the youth and those supporting them avoid those poor job matches. So career planning has also become more and more a way to help improve the transition or employment planning components in an individualized education program or an IEP. A goal for employment as well as post-secondary education and training is required as part of a transition IEP here in Wisconsin beginning at age 14. The federal requirement is age 16. I don't think we have anyone on today from another state, but this is a way that we actually tried to get a jump in Wisconsin regarding transition planning, because it is a long, winding, and often complicated road, and it rarely stays in a straight line from that year that a student turns 14, and every goal and every support, every interest and preference of that student remaining the same all the way up through graduation or exiting high school. So beginning early, and in terms of self-advocacy, beginning those skills early too is a good thing. Helping youth begin thinking about work in a productive way. One of the ways that I used to promote our summer youth programs when it was possible to go into a classroom with a large number of students in person was I would engage them by saying, show of hands if you want to um, live at home with mom and dad for the rest of your life. And no one would typically raise their hand. And if anyone did, I would tell them I didn't believe them. So the way to get out of your family home is to develop skills that make you employable and then to find that job. So if we start early and set high expectations that they're going to go to work and we believe in them and we know they can succeed in some chosen field, doing that young will help them see in a productive way. And we'll talk more about high expectations as we go along as well. But another thing I like to say with this is, if it's in particular for parents, but think of anyone who is a youth with a disability who has siblings maybe that don't have identified disabilities, we would definitely expect those without disabilities to go to work after school in some way. It's just understood that after school comes work. So why would we think any differently of our youth with disabilities? And then, career planning itself helps set goals and steps that are realistic to reach the long-term career and job goals that the youth express. Years ago, I supported a number of IEP meetings with a particular student, and she had a very good teacher that was very skilled and very resourceful when it came to transition planning for her students. And every meeting that we did, or every conversation that we had, it kept coming up that this student wanted to be a race car driver. And I'm sure all of you listening understand how difficult a field that is to get into, and it requires a highly specialized set of skills. So we said to the student, what do you like about it? And it came out that one of the things she liked was she liked the idea of having a driving job, which allowed us to sort of pare down or expand out her options as the teacher put together her IEP and figured out what support she would need, what job shadows she could do, and things of that nature. She was able to expand out to driving jobs and had a lot of contacts to get some of those things started without necessarily squashing the dream of being a race car driver per se. And it also came out in the course of interest inventories given to this student that they just like to be around people in general, which the teacher knew as well as anyone to be true from how social she was at school. So we started identifying other interests that the student had that would allow her to work around people. And I believe a hairstylist interest or preference came out of that. So that's how we gradually expanded the possible job and career options for this student. So just one more slide quick, and then we'll get to the question that came in. This is a little bit of how families can help, and it's something that as a parent center, of course, is near and dear to our hearts here at Facets. And the key is positive family involvement, though, because research shows that high expectations lead to good success, and family involvement and academic success leads to employment success, and it all ties together. So identifying strengths early in the IEP, as we discussed with the required post-secondary goal areas, is one tool to do that, far from the only one. It's a cliche, but it is true that parents are their children's first teacher. So it's oftentimes is on the parents to identify their child's strengths early, perhaps well before the required IEP component of transition planning gets underway at age 14. So what is your child good at? What are they not good at? And I don't just mean uh, academic subjects and core courses. I mean things like, can they attend to their self-care needs? Uh, do they need a lot of reminders? Do they have trouble keeping a schedule? What are they able to do for themselves if no one is around, at mealtime, per se? Can they get themselves out of bed in the morning semi-independently and to bed at night, at least semi-independently? And I'm not talking as a person with a physical disability, by the way. I don't mean, those things which kids are might be physically incapable of doing for a variety of reasons. I'm talking about those situations where they can build the skills, and we can identify what soft skills they need to work on at home while maintaining those high expectations. So that's actually a good lead into our question. I'm going to advance. Okay, this is the last one I want to do before I answer the question. Well, it's such a good segue. I didn't have the natural pause, but given what it was, I'm going to go ahead and open that up now. This person has asked, is there an age that seems to be most appropriate for having this conversation with a child? And this came up when we're talking about job and career planning, but it certainly extends to the development of self-advocacy skills. In in the self-advocacy department, first of all, we typically say that the truest answer is it depends, because it's like the IEP itself, it's based on the individual needs of the child. And oh, the person it chimes in with, they're talking about disability awareness. So that is all a personal choice based on the skills, the strengths, the weaknesses that the parents, as that first teacher, that primary adult influencer from a young age, can discern. And we'll talk more about disclosure the second half of the presentation, but there is no rule of thumb per se. It is personal, even in deciding, in a job interview context, when to disclose or if to disclose a disability. So I'll address that specifically. But for you at home, it's the guidance is what is most important for my child to know, in not giving them too much information too fast, or guiding them to say, my name is Matthew and I might learn differently, or my legs don't work the same way that yours do, or things like that when someone asks. Because when you're out in the community, who are clearly the most curious people? It's young kids, right? And some, are just, real nice and fun and expressive and curious, and they like you can sort of disclose playfully and begin having that conversation. And some are just like real direct with, why are you in a wheelchair? And even now, when I get that on occasion today, um, it's it can be a tough thing, because it might happen at a time that I don't really have time to disclose, or I'm just sort of put off by the directness of the ask, depending on the age of the person asking. The worst one as an adult is I still get the phenomenon in which I'm with another adult, but I'm in my wheelchair, and they will ask the question of the person with me instead of me, and it's clearly something that I am meant to answer. So the disclosure piece is a personal choice, as is the disability awareness piece. But for us at Facets, it's all about, do they know? Can they express in a few simple sentences, you know, that they have a disability, maybe the name of it, and just a little bit about how it impacts their learning. And the reason that transition planning, for example, begins at 14 is we kind of think that by the time they get to middle school, high school, we can put more in their hands as far as taking an active role in their IEP and the planning for it and their goals and so on. And we really do need to hear from them, since we're talking by definition about planning for life after high school, what what they want to do. So the IEP meetings and the like are not just a room full of, or virtual room full of people talking about them. So I did not do a very good job of answering that concisely, but I hope that that gave you some of what you wanted. We will talk more about disclosure and how all this fits into job searches and succeeding on the job in the second half of our presentation. So keep chiming in with the questions and or comments, folks. I will pause again before the end, but if we have something super pertinent before that time, I will watch for that as well. Just going to clear these out. So this, I'm not exactly sure when this presentation was originally authored, but the points it makes on balance are right on target here. As we get in a little bit to using personal networks, and that first bullet points relationships and not want ads, using the old phrase from the newspaper driven classified ad days, provide the most job opportunities. And I don't have a stat on this, a current one in front of me, but I have heard that supported in many different presentations and articles just from overall reading since then, is that there's a high percentage of jobs that are filled without even having a posted opening, because it's the person with the position to fill reaching out to someone that they know, and then different things ensue when they have the job. I've seen it in our field as well on occasion. So relationships and networking are those tools that we want to begin exposing our young people to as they begin a job search process. And in a way, just as parents are their child's first teacher, they are also going to be the first example, perhaps, of how to network. So as your kids see you networking and how you interact with people and have maybe found different opportunities as your career advances, that's providing the model for them to do that. Now, specifically in disability services, of course, we have service providers created and meant to do exactly that, and to serve and support people with disabilities. I'm sure all of you this know that the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation is the primary division and sort of agency that guide employment services, that fund employment services. We'll talk a little bit. We've got a slide devoted to how they work together with schools and the things that parties are required to do to support our students with disabilities, especially early on in a job search process. Not going to spend any time on the last bullet point, but just as we take this in and through the years as you guide a youth with a disability through a job search process, just think back to how did you find your first job? And my very first job, in fact, was through a networking connection that I had at the time through Wheelchair Sports that became a summer job, and provided me an initial introduction to the workforce as a high schooler, that I used the soft skills developed doing that to build my resume and succeed in future opportunities that I had. My arrow keys continue not to want to work today. So here's our DVR slide. As I said, it's a state agency that helps people with disabilities remove barriers and find work. And literally the two-pronged criteria for the initial question of can DVR help you is it has to be an individual with a disability. It doesn't have to be a student. It can be really of any age. It just needs to be an identified disability and an identified possible barrier to finding and keeping employment, and then DVR is the agency for you. This is not a DVR specific presentation. Also, I know there are varying DVR stories and experiences about whether as an agency they succeeded in helping find a consumer employment, and a lot of different and unique things can happen. But DVR is a great resource and a great agency to have, because our employment numbers in Wisconsin and around the country would be abysmal without vocational rehabilitation agencies and funding for those services. It is a voluntary program, no age restrictions once in, and there's a process for closing a case with successful placement, we hope. But if at a certain point in time, like let's say, for example, something happened to my job status here, and then I sought DVR support again to help me with a further job search process, I could do that. As a former DVR consumer who had a successful closure, I am not closed forever. For me personally, it would probably mean that a new barrier had presented itself if I sought their services again. But point being, once you're out, you're not out forever. DVR will continue to support it. Now, on the next slide, we'll talk more specifically about how DVR works with schools to support youth. I've embedded two videos, the DVR 101 video, and then a really good youth in transition video that you can view on your own time if you like. We also hosted a webinar a couple of weeks ago called How DVR and Schools Work Together for Youth, which also included a little bit of the DVR 101 component, and the whole thing was presented by a veteran DVR counselor who's held a variety of roles in transition planning within DVR. So you can check that out if you would like by going to our events calendar at wifacets.org. So pre-employment transition services refer to services that DVR is required to work with schools to provide. And there are 5 core components of pre-employment transition services, going left to right, up to down. The only reason that the information on transition or post-secondary education programs text is smaller is, I think, an effort to make sure all of this fit on a slide. But these are a required expenditure for DVR. You see at least 15% must be spent on these service categories: job exploration, counseling, work-based learning, information on post-secondary education, workplace readiness training, self-advocacy instruction, including peer mentoring. So that is pretty exhaustive of anything that I think could be included there. They can certainly go over 15%, but one of the ways that DVR provides these things generally with schools is, most of you, if not all of you, probably know that each school district has a DVR liaison at the high school level. They assign a DVR counselor to act as a liaison with the school, and oftentimes that is a student's first introduction to DVR and its services, and they can make an appointment to discuss things with the liaison. If there's a problem with that process, like the liaison is in transition, or a teacher, for whatever reason, does not connect students with that DVR counselor and encourage that contact and those appointments, it's not written anywhere that says you can't be your own DVR consumer. It's not something you have to wait for the school to initiate. Generally speaking, the encouraged application and referral process, they would say, would begin 2 years prior to graduation. I would say those that say at least 2 years prior to graduation are more in the spirit of the planning for these things early. But certainly, if you want to work and you think you might have a career to finding and keeping employment, DVR is a service for you to explore. None of this means that students shouldn't enterprise their own job opportunities. I did a lot of that even while a DVR consumer back in the day. So there isn't anything wrong with that, but commensurate with one's skill set and ability to enterprise their own opportunities, that is also encouraged. So the resume, and I mentioned in the open that we've provided for you some examples of real life resumes from past students with permission. I kind of made this point earlier when addressing high expectations. Do we expect youth with disabilities to follow the same process as others to find employment? I made it in reference to siblings, but it applies across the board. And I certainly hope the answer to that is yes. I will share an example that the worst IEP meeting I attended, commonplace event, the way it started out, the parent called in, said, oh, the school's not doing, and she had this whole list of things, and I'm, kind of like, yeah, it sounds like a mess, and it worked with my schedule and funding at Facets at the time, so I went, and I get to the meeting, and it turns out that the school is providing many, if not all, of the things that the parents said they weren't, and the school had specific instances in which the student who was, I don't remember their exact age, but basically they were capable of accessing some of their own services or following through on things that would help them and meet IEP goals and make progress in class, and they were refusing the help that was offered to them. And when the parent heard that, they said, well, they kind of went defeatist and said, well, there's one in every family that's just going to sit home collecting the SSI check, and the rest of the adults in the room, including me, were flabbergasted that that's what we were hearing from this parent. And I know the meeting was stressful. It's not that they aren't. So I'm not I don't share the story to penalize anyone for their reaction. It's just it underscores the importance of setting those high expectations. And the student, by the way, was in the room during all of this and was able to hear the parent seemingly resigned to that's how it was going to be. I mean, every job seeker needing a resume is an obvious point. The point I would make that's not here about that is resumes may be taking different forms now. Visual resumes are very popular and can be very useful for employers. I'm not an HR expert by any means. Our business is special education, but I'm sure all of us have heard about the importance of keywords on a resume, and particularly if it's a organization or company that is using some electronic screening tool for resumes and candidates. If you don't have certain keywords they're looking for that match a position description, that system might spit you out and the candidate get an automated reject response back almost before a real job search or candidacy process could start. Um, so we need to be careful about what's on our resume, paying attention to the necessary skills, the preferred qualifications, all of those things. But it's about selling yourself. So no amount of experience is too much. I would say being overqualified is a thing that you hear when being rejected for opportunities. But I've also been told, don't leave things off your resume that because you're scared to be dismissed as overqualified. The resume is about selling yourself creatively not in the sense of making things up, but to illustrate, paid employment is not the only example of work experience and skills. We're going to talk specifically now about volunteering. That's the other big area. This can often be a stepping stone to employment and a paid and hopefully community-based opportunity. Using volunteer experiences to build work skills and improve a resume is always a good thing. And it was, in fact, a stepping stone indirectly. I don't have time to get into the story, but volunteering was a stepping stone to my future career here at Facets. But it is not meant to be a long-term solution to paid employment. The strength that it gives us is it shows employers that youth want to work despite a lack of paid employment, because there could be all kind of reasons for that lack of paid employment. Lack of opportunity, transportation, maybe an attempt at a bad job match, a health scare, even some sense that you know there was maybe some discrimination could be involved. Like, no matter what, they were never going to get the job because an employer, though they cannot ask about disability, might have sensed that there was a disability present and stayed away from a candidate. Trying several different experiences so youth can explore different types of things is good, and that's self-explanatory. You may volunteer in a field at a place and find that you might not like what they actually do there or what you'd have to do starting out. Like, a lot of kids say they want to work with animals. They don't sometimes recognize that the first experience they might get to do that is cleaning up after them. It's not petting them, it's not playing with them, it's grunt work. So job accommodations, the disclaimer here is that we're not lawyers or legal services here at Facets, but I can tell you that allowing accommodations to allow a person to perform an essential function of a given job is literally the legal definition of accommodations. They are usually simple and inexpensive to provide. Oftentimes, I don't, it might be a sliding scale what the current average cost of accommodations is, but oftentimes the accommodation is zero. Just a very quick story. There was a young man at one point. I got this story from an employment provider. A young man applied for a job and they hired him and everything was going well, but he was a wheelchair user and realized that he could not uh, reach the drinking fountain or bubbler, for those of you where I am near the Milwaukee area, could not reach the drinking fountain, and brought that to the attention of his employer, and they panicked and said, "Oh, we're going to have to, move the entire fountain, and it's going to cost all this money and holes in the wall and all of that." And the new employee says, "No, no, no. How about you just install a Dixie cup dispenser lower nearby to the bubbler? I can reach down, get a cup, and fill that cup up." And that was a lot cheaper and easier for the employer, and worked to accommodate that employee. That the positive experience for youth, I think, is also because the fundamental purpose for any accommodation is to level the playing field and allow the youth on the job to succeed. And we're going to talk about disclosure now, but the knowing how and when to ask for accommodations demonstrates that initiative that any employer will say that they want and need from an employee. So job accommodation network is still probably the end all be all resource for those of you that want to research more specific questions or types of accommodation. You see the web link there. They have fact sheets for all disability types, and this is constantly updated, so I would encourage you to check that out. So disclosure, again, gets back to, it's the bullet point in the middle. Disclosure is a personal choice, but particularly in a context of needing possible job accommodations, it is not the employer's responsibility primarily to ask if any will be needed. In fact, they probably shouldn't, because one example of an illegal question in a job interview setting is, do you have a disability? So knowing your disability and how it affects you at school, at work, wherever, is going to be particularly important if you'll need to disclose for accommodations purposes. And I mentioned the illegal question about having a disability, so youth should be guided and practice possible interview questions, and DVR vendors are among those, teachers as well, of course, that can help students practice along with parents what those types of questions might be. And 411 on disability disclosure is a long resource, but it's very, very good and has a nice table of contents for parents and educators to consult, resources to use in your classroom, in your home, and so on, about different aspects and scenarios of disability disclosure. For me personally, as a wheelchair user, I resolved, not immediately, but early on, that unless there was something specific that I thought warranted it, I would not disclose before I got to a face-to-face interview circumstance. And then, of course, they can see that I come in a wheelchair. They still can't ask me about my disability, but the reason for my decision was I want them to look at me and the qualifications and strengths that I bring to the field of candidates and envision how I can successfully do the job, as opposed to wondering about the disability and any limitations and the cost of accommodations, etc. The interview, we talked about practicing the basics, not stressing the disability or giving too much information about the disability in general. So if a candidate chooses to disclose a disability, and now primarily we're talking about one of the many types of invisible disabilities, I should say. If you choose to disclose, be careful about that and avoid giving too much information. But if it's an example of answering a question of how you can turn a perceived or real weakness into a strength as it pertains to your ability to do the job, then you can do so. But practicing the basics also means things like making and maintaining eye contact with the interviewer. And we know that that can be difficult with some disabilities. So that's an example of something that may need to be explained a little bit, so you're not perceived as disrespectful or disinterested during that interview. Coaching a young person, for those of you providers, if you're able to do that, that can certainly help. Things like professional dress as well, obviously being on time or really early for a job interview, if it's whether it's held in person or now virtually in a pandemic age, can also help. I think most of you probably know parents may be allowed to participate in interview setting. I've never been directly an employment services provider, but having worked with them on panels and such and heard many of them present, I would consider that parents being present scenario atypical. But that's where the practice comes in, and there is no legal right attached uh, when it comes to a parent participating in a youth with disabilities job interview. So this is based of soft skills, the employer's perspective. If we had more time, or if we were in person, I would like to have an employer co-present on these particular things. This is not, there's nothing here that is specific to persons with disabilities. These are things that when you hear success stories and see videos of successful job placements, that employers will attest to the willingness and eagerness of people with disabilities to do these things, and just that desire to work hard and that being grateful for the opportunity, because maybe they've experienced a lot of failure or lack of success when it comes to getting and keeping a job previously. But there are entire curriculums, such as skills to pay the bills, which is a robust one funded by some of those DVR pre-employment transition services that I talked about, that can help our youth with disabilities with some of these things, as do your independent living centers that serve your county. Every county in America has one. So if you don't know what yours is and you're listening to this, Google independent living centers, state of Wisconsin, and you'll see them come up. There are 8 of them total in our state. But that's another resource for courses and support for some of these skills, as well as, of course, our schools. So the best thing a family member can do for a young worker is, teaching the things that you see on the left. Hopefully you've emulated, apparently I can't talk today, but hopefully you have shown your child that, if you're a parent, as you have worked and they have grown up through the years, at points before they indicated a desire to work and started applying and have gotten their own job. Hopefully you've shown them and they've demonstrated the ability to take direction and work with others and be flexible. You're not going to get along with everybody in your workplace. If you do, that's a bonus, but it's not necessarily typical. So the importance of that, being flexible and knowing that when you're especially being paid to do a job, that you've got a job to do, and it doesn't really matter whether you like the person or your boss or not. Families can build that support system. If appropriate, communicate regularly with employer and service staff, knowing that sometimes that it won't work or doesn't work is okay. That's not the opposite of high expectations, but I think it dovetails well with high expectations, actually, because we tried, we shot our shot, as the saying goes, and it didn't work out the first time, but we can always come back and try again. Maybe it's the field, maybe, they just were a little young for paid work, whatever it might be. But you can maintain that high expectations and accept that not everything goes right the first time. And I actually think that some of us participating today, and those without disabilities, or as we say, in the general population, can relate to the experience of, perhaps an unsuccessful in some way initial job opportunity. So practicing filling out job applications, that's a common IEP goal, and transition support. And it's easy to do online. You can practice even on a specific company website or something by filling in the stuff but not submitting as an exercise. Planning for transportation if necessary. Easier to do, certainly in bigger urban areas where I am. If you live in a rural area, that might be more difficult. You need to investigate what funding is available, what resources are available through your county or through private entities. Disability management, we discussed a little bit earlier. That's a pretty broad area, but the things like, what are your strengths, weaknesses, what's your preferred time of day, how does your disability impact your ability to work in terms of health and alertness, etc. Encouraging post-secondary education, because while college is not for everybody, that the first job should not be the last job, because that accepting that as reality would probably not be setting the bar high enough. So never stop expecting great things. And that's my contact information, email and phone number, toll-free number here at Facets. I'd be happy to answer any deeper questions. We do have a little time remaining if anyone has additional questions or comments while we're still together today. I'll give folks a second to type. I'm going to stop my screen share as well as the recording, however, and then I have a couple of closing announcements if there are no questions. Will your videos be shared is one question. Yes, if you mean the recording of the webinar, that will be shared in an email that you'll receive about an hour after the webinar officially ends, along with a link to the SurveyMonkey evaluation. So you will have access to this session again. It may be shared for free. If you mean the embedded videos, those are right on the slide. You should be able to click on them and view them on your own time. Somebody just saying, that they have to leave. That is okay. Another thank you. And some someone wanting to know, what did I say there were 8 of in Wisconsin. Those would be independent living centers. And one function they serve is some of those, the building of soft skills that will allow and put our youths in a better position to succeed. So if you don't know the name of your center in your county, serving your county, or where it might be located, uh, Google independent living centers in Wisconsin and you will find that information. Someone's calling me Mr. Zelmer in the chat. Thank you for your respect and the compliment, but that's making me feel old. If you're still on, I always joke that Mr. Zelmer is my dad, and I didn't actually stop the recording. So now everyone who tunes in will get to hear that. Here